Just real quick, kind of turn it over to you. How did the kind of Antonio Conte come about? How was that for you being on the other side? I mean, it's been a couple years really since we've heard from Antonio Conte at his time in Chelsea and some things like that. So yeah, we'll just kind of keep it general to kick it off.
Yeah. Well, Inter Milan, I've got to say, were very accommodating. They kind of facilitated the whole thing for us. It's an interview I've been trying to get ever since he left, but for one reason or the other, it's taken a while. I was meant to go out there a little while ago before COVID. I think something around the England team happened that meant I couldn't travel over there. I had to cover something over here instead. So that got postponed, and then COVID happened, and eventually Milan were like, let's just do it on Zoom. So the Milan officer set it up with a laptop his end, and I was sitting where I'm sitting now doing it, and we had about 45 minutes on Zoom. And it was great. It was one of those where some interviews you don't have to transcribe, but we use tape recorders these days. You don't sit doing it shorthand, and a lot of interviews you don't have to transcribe the whole tape. In 40 minutes, there's maybe 20 minutes of interesting stuff and 20 minutes of kind of fluff, and you just transcribe the best bits. But with Conte, it's full transcription. It took me quite a long time because you needed every single word to get the full context, and everything he said. I barely left out anything. Everything he said was interesting.
Was there a story or fact, because you had the benefit of covering him, of getting to know him during the time he was at Chelsea? What was the thing that surprised you the most? Was there a story or an anecdote that really just you didn't pick up on when you were covering him that you got to see more clearly now?
The thing that struck me about him, I'm not fully answering you. I will come around to your question, try and give you a proper answer on that question. The thing that really struck me about him that I wasn't expecting, though, was how conciliatory he was about everything. He wanted to... I thought he might carry on his war with Diego Costa, for instance, and he wanted to get his point across on Costa, but he also wanted to make it clear that they'd won a league title together and he was never going to forget that, and whatever had happened between them didn't take away from that. He was really interested on Abramovich. I didn't know this is more answering your question now, Dan, that I didn't know that I knew Abramovich had visited Cobham a lot, but I didn't know that Abramovich was kind of asking him for videos of games and videos of preparation and real in-depth kind of stuff. I always assumed that Abramovich would come into the training ground and just kind of have a coffee with him and talk about how things were generally. But clearly, he was a lot more involved with that. He wanted videos. He wanted to go and watch them train. He wanted... I think Conte had to give him a presentation maybe after the Arsenal game when they lost, when it was all looking quite bad. I think he had to give a presentation about how he felt he could turn it around, what his plans were. I'm told that presentation went really well. And I really wasn't aware of the level of detail that Abramovich wanted off him and quite how involved he was back then. That's probably the main thing that took me by surprise.
Like you mentioned the tone of the article, and I think that's it, with some of the answers. Some of that stood out to me is it wasn't straight to war. It was kind of a little bit softer. Do you think his time at Inter and maybe current circumstances have impacted the way he's reflecting upon Chelsea, or is it something that he's just over it now and maybe ready to move on?
Yeah, I think he is over it now. I think they had a pretty bitter split in the end, which I think he was upset about at the time. 2 years or so has passed now, and I think he's over it. I think he's looking ahead, and now he looks back on Chelsea with a lot of fondness. I think he rates his first season as his finest achievement in management, winning the Premier League in his first season. I think that bitterness has left him. I think there's still a sense of what might have been. I really got the sense from him that he felt he could create a legacy, that he felt he had put the club in a position to go and really dominate for years. That's his side of the story. There are other people at Chelsea who've got another side to that story. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that Conte obviously talks a lot about himself. I was asking him about himself. But it can make it look that it was all just him, and it wasn't all just him. It was a team effort, and they succeeded as a team, and they sort of failed as well as a team. And I think he would take some responsibility for that. But I do feel that he really felt that at the end of that first season, he could create a squad and a team that could go on and either win or be right in there challenging for a very long time. And he feels sad that he thinks he didn't quite get that chance.
Yeah, I think that, is there's so much to dive into this. So again, like, definitely go check it out on the Telegraph site. It touches on a lot of different things. I think that's really interesting. So, like, covered a lot of ground in 45 minutes, especially with Antonio Conte. Like, he can kind of be, in his mind and take it, based on the press conferences we saw for 2 years. But as you touched on the signings of players, I'm always maybe a little hesitant to take it at face value, but I have two questions about this. So obviously, he said Lukaku and Van Dijk were the two main ones that he felt would like improve the team massively. He's like, look, I'm doing Lukaku now inner, like, I told you so moment. So my question is, one, were those just like his signings, or was it like, how do you know how involved the club were about them? Did they have a different approach? Or like, no, we understand those are good players, but we're trying to do something different. So do you know where the breakdown was on that? And was this hindsight of him being like, look how good Van Dijk is. See, if I only had him, of course we would have won everything.
No, he did. I remember at the time, I mean, without Antonio, this part, it was a very interesting part of the interview, but it didn't surprise me because I did report on it at the time. He wanted Lukaku and Van Dijk, I remember it. And he had a lot of support from the club. They did genuinely try and sign those two players. They thought they had them both. I'm told Van Dijk went in for meetings with them and kind of gave them the impression that he wanted to join. That one changed massively when Klopp got to Van Dijk. I think Chelsea would probably tell you that Conte himself was partly responsible for them not signing Van Dijk, because I think Klopp charmed Van Dijk. I think Klopp got into him and really got into his head and charmed him to Liverpool. And I suspect Chelsea think that Conte could have done maybe a little bit more to sell the club from his perspective and not just leave it to the club to get that signing. Lukaku was a problem because Conte had put a lot of personal investment into. Huge fan of the player. Obviously, there's the link there already. We know that Emanalo was a huge fan of the player. The fact they didn't sign him became a real issue because he could not understand how they missed him. He really could not understand how they missed him. And it created a problem. And look, as reported at the time, they missed him because of an agent. The agent wanted certain agent fees. Chelsea, perhaps incorrectly, thought that they were probably the only club that Lukaku was realistically going to join. So thought they could sit back and drive a bargain, while on the quiet, the agent was doing something with United, and there was a huge fallout. Chelsea still tried to hijack that deal right at the last moment, even though they'd kind of missed him to United just before he actually signed for United. They tried to hijack it back and failed. So yeah, they got close on both. Conte definitely at one stage thought he had both players in the door. And the Lukaku miss was the one that caused issues going forwards.